You ever think you know someone really know them, only to realize one day that you've been completely wrong? That the person you raised, loved, and believed in could make choices so reckless, so baffling, they'd leave your life in ruins. That's what happened to me. My name is Victor, and at 66 years old, I thought I understood my son better than anyone. But what started as a quiet September morning turned into the day I was slapped literally and figuratively by the truth. A truth that would unravel everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and loyalty. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments below. It means the world to us to see how far these stories travel, and maybe, just maybe, someone out there has faced something similar and needs to know they're not alone. Now, I want you to picture this. I was in my backyard, tending to the potted peppers and rosemary I'd nurtured through the summer, when the familiar sound of my son's car pulling into my driveway stirred something uneasy in me. The doors slammed harder than usual. There was tension in the air. And when I rounded the corner, I saw him, Jason, and his wife, Sienna, standing on my porch, not for a visit, not to say hello, but with luggage, desperation in their eyes, and a request that would shake the very foundation of our relationship. What followed was a storm of betrayal, financial ruin, and a choice no parent ever wants to make. Stay with me, because this isn't just about money, it's about dignity, manipulation, and what happens when love for your child collides with the need to finally say, enough. I unlocked the front door with hands still damp from gardening, not yet ready for the storm about to come through it. Jason stepped in first, eyes avoiding mine, his once confident shoulders sagging under a weight I couldn't yet name. Sienna followed behind him, dragging two oversized suitcases, and dressed like she was headed to a fashion shoot, rather than seeking refuge in her father-in-law's modest two-bedroom house. My gut twisted. Something was off more than just an unannounced visit. I asked carefully, "What's going on?" Jason gave Sienna a nervous glance before settling into my old recliner, the one his mother had picked out decades ago, now sunken in from years of use. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "Dad, we sold the house." I froze, unsure I'd heard correctly. "What house?" "The Willow Lane house," he replied. "The house I had helped them buy. The house I poured my retirement savings into when they were starting out $35,000, scraped together from 3 decades of honest work. The house I spent countless weekends helping them paint, fix, furnish. The house where I thought they'd build their future. You sold it without saying anything?" My voice was calm, but my heart was racing. Sienna answered for him, her tone clipped and defensive. "It was our house, Victor. We didn't need permission." I nodded slowly. "I understand that. But you always talked about raising your kids there, settling down. What changed?" Jason mumbled. "Plans changed." I took a deep breath, trying to keep the trembling out of my voice. "How much did you sell it for?" $580,000, Sienna said, almost with pride. It felt like she was announcing a lottery win. I nearly choked. That was more than I had made in the last 10 years of my career. "So," I asked cautiously, "where are you moving to next?" Silence. Jason looked down. Sienna adjusted her watch, her manicure catching the morning light. "We were hoping," Jason said, "to stay here for a little while, just until we figure things out." I blinked. "Here? With me?" "Just for a few months," he rushed to add. "We won't be any trouble." I looked around my small home, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen just big enough for one person to cook in at a time. I'd built this place for quiet, for peace, for retirement, not for guests who just sold their nearly $600,000 house. "What happened to the money?" I asked, knowing but not yet accepting. Sienna cleared her throat. "I had some expenses." "What kind of expenses?" "Jewelry, a spa retreat with my sister. I got my car detailed. I paid off some credit cards." I stared at her, speechless. "How much credit card debt?" $75,000, Jason said softly. I felt lightheaded. 75,000? "Before we were married," Sienna cut in. "It's not your concern, Victor." "It became my concern," I said slowly, "when you showed up at my door asking for help." She rolled her eyes. "I also invested in a friend's boutique," she added like she was talking about donating to a local charity. "How much?" 260,000, she said, folding her arms. The air left my lungs. You put more than $250,000 into a boutique? It's going to be successful, she snapped. Her business plan is solid. I looked at Jason. He couldn't meet my eyes. I did a quick calculation. Between the boutique, the credit card debt, the spa trips, the jewelry, the gifts for her family there, should have still been tens of thousands left. Where's the rest of it? I asked. Gone, she said simply. It's all gone. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair. I wanted to believe this was just poor judgment, a few foolish decisions. But something deeper, more dangerous, was at play. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was recklessness on a scale I couldn't comprehend. And now they wanted to move into my house as if none of it had happened? As if burning through over $500,000 in months was just a bump in the road? Jason looked at me then, finally. And what I saw wasn't just shame, it was resignation. Like a man who'd lost control of his own life and knew it. Please, Dad, he said. Just until we find our footing again. I looked at my son, the boy I'd taught how to ride a bike, the man I'd watched walk across the stage at graduation, the one who once promised at his mother's funeral, with tears in his eyes, that he'd always take care of me. I stared at him and realized with a deep, aching pain that he wasn't asking for help. He was begging for a lifeline. But I also knew one thing, clear as day. If I said yes, I'd be sinking with them. I stood up from the kitchen chair, my mind reeling, heart heavy with a blend of disbelief and something that felt disturbingly close to grief. Jason, I said carefully, help me understand something. You sold your house for nearly $600,000, and within a matter of months, that money is just gone? He didn't answer. He just stared at the scuffed wood floor like it held the script for whatever he was supposed to say next. I turned to Sienna. You spent over $250,000 investing in a boutique? What kind of return were you expecting? She gave me a look that bordered on smug. It's not just about returns, it's about supporting people, building community. Her tone was so condescending, so self-assured, I felt a chill run through me. And the rest of it? Jewelry? Car detailing? Spa weekends? You make it sound so dramatic, she scoffed. I had expenses. That's what money is for. Expenses? I repeated. Sienna, your expenses could have funded someone's retirement. They could have bought a second home, put 3 kids through college. She narrowed her eyes. Well, it was my money. Jason and I made the decision together. Jason lifted his head weakly, as if to speak, but no words came. I could see it then. He wasn't just lost. He was trapped. And the worst part was, I don't think he even knew how deep the trap went. I stepped back, needing distance, clarity, oxygen. So now, after all of that, you come here asking to live under my roof? Just for a little while, Jason said. We need time to regroup. No, I said, my voice steady and low. No? Jason blinked as if the word itself stunned him. No, I repeated. You can't stay here. Not after what I've just heard. For a split second there was silence. But then Sienna stood up so quickly the chair screeched across the floor. You're serious? She hissed. You'd let your son, your only child, be homeless? You made yourselves homeless? I replied. I didn't sell your house. I didn't drain your bank account. You're unbelievable, she spat. You sit here in your little house, with your stupid garden and your worn-out recliner, and you think you're better than us? At least we had ambition. We took risks. You didn't take risks, I said. You made reckless choices, and now you're trying to unload the consequences onto me. Jason finally stood, eyes glassy. Dad, please. We're not asking for a handout, just a place to stay for a little while. We'll figure it out. With what money, Jason? I asked. You said it yourself. It's all gone. Are you counting on me to fund the next phase of this disaster, too? We're family, he whispered. Yes, I said. We are. And that's exactly why I'm not going to enable this behavior. Because I love you too much to watch you drown and pretend I don't see it happening. Sienna let out a sharp, joyless laugh. Love? This is your version of love? Turning your back on your own son? I'm not turning my back, I said. I'm drawing a line, and that line is my front door. Her face twisted with something I hadn't seen before, something cruel, feral, vindictive, You know what I think? I think you're jealous. Jealous that Jason found someone better than you. Someone he actually listens to. That's what this is really about. I took a deep breath. This is about watching the man I raised become a stranger. It's about realizing that the values I tried to instill in him, discipline, humility, integrity, have all been buried under a mountain of shopping bags and bad investments. She stepped closer, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. You bitter, lonely old man. No wonder your wife died young, probably just to escape this miserable life with you. The room fell ice cold. Jason gasped softly but said nothing. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice even. Get out, I said. Victor, come on, Jason began. Get out, I repeated. Now. Sienna grabbed her bag with a furious swipe and marched toward the door. Jason hesitated, clearly torn between two gravitational pulls, the woman he'd married and the man who raised him. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. No, I said. I'm correcting one. As they stepped onto the porch, Sienna turned around and shouted for the whole street to hear. You all want to know what kind of man Victor Reynolds really is? He's throwing his own son out on the street? Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains and screen doors. Some stepped onto their lawns. I stayed silent. There was nothing more to say. And that's when it happened. In front of the neighbors, the mailbox, the picket fence I'd painted myself 2 summers ago, Sienna slapped me across the face. The sound echoed down the street like thunder. Jason froze. My face stung, but not from the impact from the betrayal. I looked at him. He looked away. That was the moment I knew something inside me had changed forever. The sting on my cheek faded within minutes, but the silence from my son lingered like a bruise that wouldn't fade. Sienna stood there, breathing heavily, hands still slightly raised as if daring me to react. The neighborhood was watching Mrs. Klein across the street with her garden gloves still on, the Henderson kids frozen mid-bike ride, Mr. Patel leaning quietly against his mailbox. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply turned my gaze to Jason and asked, calm and deliberate, Are you going to stand there and say nothing? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She didn't mean to. Jason, I said, my voice low and cold. Your wife just slapped your father in front of half the neighborhood. Don't insult either of us by pretending it was an accident. Sienna stepped in, her voice shrill. Don't make this about you playing the victim, Victor. You're the one throwing us out like garbage. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. What are you doing? She snapped. Calling the police. Her eyes widened. You're serious? I'm absolutely serious, I said as I dialed. You've crossed every line there is. This is assault. This is trespassing. And this, I gestured to the scene around us, is public humiliation that you orchestrated. She grabbed Jason's arm, hissing, Tell your father to stop. Right now. Jason looked torn, his face pale, sweat beading at his temples. But he didn't say a word. I gave the dispatcher my address, explained what happened, and was told officers were on the way. When I hung up, I looked straight at Sienna. You have 5 minutes to collect your bags and get off my property. If you're still here when the officers arrive, they'll remove you themselves. She stared at me, her defiance flickering. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said. The next 10 minutes felt both like a blur and an eternity. Sienna scrambled to gather her things, her performance shifting rapidly from rage to tears to threats of lawsuits and smear campaigns. Jason moved slowly, mechanically, like a man assembling his own prison brick by brick. When the police arrived, 2 officers, one young and calm, the other older and seasoned. They took statements from both me and my neighbors, who had seen everything. Mrs. Klein confirmed the slap. Mr. Patel said he heard Sienna shout that I deserved it. The older officer turned to me and asked, Do you want to press charges, sir? I looked at Jason again. Still, he said nothing. Still, he couldn't bring himself to defend me. I nodded. Yes, I do. They took Sienna aside, informed her of her rights, and as they escorted her to the patrol car, she turned to Jason one last time, her mascara smudged and lips trembling in false sorrow. Are you seriously going to let him do this to me? Jason didn't answer. He just stood there holding a single suitcase, the rest already in the trunk. I looked at him and said, You had over $500,000. You spent it all. You stood silent while your wife assaulted your father. And now you expect sympathy? He whispered. Where do I go now? You should have thought of that before, I replied. He looked at me with something between guilt and despair, then turned and followed the patrol car as it pulled away. For a long moment I stood alone on my porch, surrounded by stunned neighbors and the weight of a broken family. Then I turned, stepped inside, and quietly closed the door behind me. The house was quiet again, almost unnaturally so, the way a forest goes silent after a storm. I stood in the hallway for a while, just breathing, letting the weight of the past hour settle over me like thick fog. My cheek still stung faintly, but what hurt more was something deeper, something rooted not in skin but in trust. That look in Jason's eyes as he watched his wife assault me, then said nothing. That silence would echo louder than the slap for the rest of my life. I made myself a cup of coffee I didn't really want, and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. The hummingbird feeder swayed in the breeze. The same birds that had been flitting about while I gardened that morning were still there, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. An hour later the phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. Jason. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Dad? He said, voice shaky, low. Sienna made bail. I said nothing. We need to talk. No, I said calmly. We really don't. Please, Dad, she's sorry about what she did. It was the heat of the moment. She was overwhelmed, embarrassed. Jason, I cut in. She slapped me in the face, in public, after burning through more than $500,000 and then demanding to live in my home. You don't get to excuse that with embarrassment. There was silence on the other end, thick and uncomfortable. Then he said, She didn't mean it. We're just going through a lot. And what part of going through a lot justifies physical violence, Jason? What part of any of this is acceptable to you? His breathing was shallow. I could hear it crackling through the line like static. We were desperate. You were reckless, I replied. There's a difference. I heard him sigh. It was the sigh of a man realizing that the version of events he had clung to was finally unraveling. Dad, I know I've made mistakes. No, I interrupted. You didn't just make mistakes. You made a series of decisions, each one compounding the last. You ignored the promissory note. You let Sienna spend every last dime from that house. And then you both showed up here expecting me to catch you when you fell. I love you, Jason, but I'm not your safety net anymore. He was quiet again, and when he finally spoke, there was something different in his tone. Promissory note? Yes, I said. You remember the $35,000 I gave you for the down payment? It wasn't a gift. You signed a legal agreement. I found it yesterday, in my files. I thought that was just paperwork, he mumbled. It was legally binding paperwork, I said flatly. You agreed to pay it back, with interest, starting 1 year after you closed on the house. You never made a single payment. I didn't realize. Then that's on you, and now that you've sold the house without paying me back, you've violated the terms of that agreement. Legally, it's called conversion. I've already contacted my attorney. The lawsuit's been filed. The line went silent again. This time for so long I wondered if he had hung up. Then I heard him swallow. How much are you suing for? $52,000. That includes interest, legal fees, and damages. We don't have that kind of money. You had it, I said. You chose to spend it on handbags and spa retreats. Can't we work something out? A payment plan? Like the original plan you ignored for 3 years? Dad, please, he said, voice cracking now. We're staying in a cheap motel. It's awful. We can barely afford another week. We've got nothing left. There it was, the desperation. The reality finally catching up to him. And still, it didn't soften me. It didn't make me want to undo what had already been set in motion. Jason, I said slowly, I meant it when I said I love you. I always have. But that love doesn't mean I'll keep allowing you to hurt me, or let someone like Sienna destroy everything I've worked for. So what do I do? He asked. He sounded younger than I'd heard him in years, like the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. You take responsibility, I said. You leave the woman who's pulled you into this mess. You pay what you owe, and you rebuild honestly this time. But she's my wife, he said, almost like a reflex. No, I replied. She's your downfall, and you have to decide if you're going to keep letting her drag you further under or finally fight your way back up. I hung up before he could respond. My hands trembled a little as I set the phone down. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. It was quiet again, but it wasn't peace. Not yet. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I laid in bed with the lights off, the ceiling fan spinning in slow, hypnotic circles above me while my mind whirled much faster. The sound of Sienna's slap, Jason's silence, the words, "She's my wife," bouncing in my skull like echoes in an empty hall. At some point around 2 a.m., I got up, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table flipping through the old file folder I dug out earlier, the one labeled Jason House Purchase. Yellowing papers, notarized signatures, copies of bank transfers, even a faded photo of the three of us in front of the Willow Lane house the day they got the keys. Jason had his arm around Sienna. I remembered how proud he looked, and how tight her smile was, even then, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of missed payments, missed birthdays, excuses. It all made sense now, looking backward. The slowly dwindling phone calls, the convenient reasons they couldn't visit, the holidays skipped with vague explanations. Sienna hadn't just taken Jason's money. She'd been taking him away from me inch by inch for years, and I'd let her. That realization, that quiet, bitter truth, made something tighten in my chest. I'd spent so long trying not to interfere, trying to respect boundaries, telling myself Jason was a grown man who had his own life to live. But what I'd really been doing was closing my eyes and hoping it would all sort itself out. It didn't. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called Robert Ames, my attorney, and asked for a meeting. He told me to come in right after lunch. When I arrived, Robert looked up from his desk and gave me that same calm, respectful nod he'd given me when I first met him 15 years ago. Back then, I'd come to him for help finalizing my wife's estate. Now I was back, for something that felt just as painful. "Victor," he said, standing to shake my hand, "I read through everything you sent over. Let's talk." I told him everything again this time, not just the numbers and legal facts, but the whole story. The visit, the confrontation, the slap, the neighbors, the phone calls. I even mentioned that Sienna had tried to smear me in front of the neighborhood and later threatened a countersuit. Robert listened patiently, occasionally scribbling something in his notepad. When I finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. "You have a solid case," he said. The promissory note was properly drafted, signed, and witnessed. And because the loan was secured by the property, the sale without repayment constitutes conversion. That's a breach of contract and potentially even fraud if they knowingly avoided the lien. "I don't want to ruin my son's life," I said, the words almost catching in my throat. "I just want him to wake up, to see what she's done." Robert nodded slowly. "Victor, sometimes the only way people wake up is when life hits them harder than you ever dared to." He gave me a moment, then continued. "There's more. You could seek punitive damages. And, given the assault and the public nature of her actions, we may have leverage if this goes to court." "You think it'll get that far? With someone like Sienna?" "Absolutely." I nodded, feeling something solidify in me. "Then let's proceed. All of it. The lawsuit, the claim on the sale. I wanted in writing that what they did was wrong and that I'm not going to lie down and take it." That evening I changed every lock in the house. Called a security company and had cameras installed front porch, back door, garage. I wasn't going to be caught unprepared again. I also called the local precinct to follow up on the assault report, made sure the paperwork was in order. I wanted it on record. Sienna Mitchell had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her erase it. The next day, Jason called again. "She's freaking out," he said. "No greeting, just straight panic. We got served with the lawsuit today." "Good," I replied. "Maybe now you'll take this seriously." "She's talking about suing you for emotional damage, saying you're harassing us." "Let her," I said. "I've documented everything, so have half the neighbors." He sighed heavily. "Dad, I don't know what to do." "Then figure it out, Jason. That's what adults do. You chose her. You let her run your life. Now you have to decide if that's still what you want." "She says you're trying to break us up." "No," I said quietly. I'm giving you a chance to walk away from someone who already broke you. He didn't answer. After a long pause, he whispered, "She's not who I thought she was." "I know," I said, "and neither are you." When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long while, watching the footage from the new porch camera loop silently on the screen. No movement, no threats, just peace. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel something dangerously close to hope. 3 days later, Robert called with news that landed in my gut like a bag of wet cement. "Victor," he said, "you might want to sit down." I was already seated at my kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of coffee in front of me. "What is it?" "My investigators finished looking into Sienna's background," he said, voice tight with something I hadn't heard from him before discussed. "It's worse than we thought." I leaned back in my chair, bracing for impact. "Go on." "Before she married Jason, she was engaged to 2 other men. Both ended the relationships after discovering she had been using their credit cards without permission. In one case, she racked up over $45,000 in debt before the guy even realized what was happening. There were also some sealed court records from out of state, but we're working on getting more information." I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest spreading like ink in water. "Jason didn't know?" "It's unlikely. She's very good at covering her tracks." "Is there more?" "There is." Robert paused. "The boutique she invested in? It doesn't exist. No license. No physical location. No tax records. It was just a shell. A cover. Her friend apparently has a history of starting and dissolving fake businesses. From what we can tell, that $260,000 vanished into thin air." I pressed my fingers to my temples. "So the money's just gone." "Every last cent." He paused again. "And Victor, there's something else." "Of course there is," I muttered. "She's been having an affair." The words fell flat at first, like my brain refused to process them. But then they hit hard. "Are you sure? We have hotel records, credit card statements, photos. His name is Richard Lansing, 51, owns a construction firm out in Evanston, married, wealthy. And he's been footing the bill for her spa treatments and luxury purchases. Our investigator even spoke to his wife, apparently. She just found out about the affair and forced him to cut ties." The puzzle pieces rearranged themselves instantly in my mind. The sudden sale of the house, the reckless spending spree, the desperation to move in with me. It wasn't just bad financial planning. Sienna's golden parachute had snapped, and now she was free-falling. "Does Jason know?" "Number." "Not yet. We wanted to tell you first." I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at my quiet street. I felt like my world was split into 2 distinct realities. The one I thought I was living in, and the one Sienna had built from manipulation, theft, and lies. "I need to tell him," I said, finally. "He deserves to hear it from me." That night I sat in my living room, hands clenched around my phone like it might leap out of my grip. After 3 rings, Jason answered. He sounded tired, beaten. "Hey, Dad, we need to talk," I said. "It's important." "Okay." I told him everything. I laid it all out calmly, clearly, piece by piece. The prior engagements, the credit card fraud, the fake boutique, the affair with Richard Lansing. At first, there was only silence. Then he whispered, "No, no, that can't be true." "It is, Jason. I've seen the records. Robert's investigator was thorough. You've been used. She said she was trying to build something, that the boutique would help us. She was never building anything but a web to trap you in. And you're not the first person she's done this to." His breath hitched. I could hear it. "The affair, that's not possible." "She told me she loved me. She told Richard Lansing the same thing," I said gently, "until his wife found out and cut her off. That's when she sold the house. That's when she came to me." The sound of him breaking wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like air escaping a balloon slowly. "She lied to me," he said. "She lied to me for years." "I'm so sorry, son. She used my money to pay for some other man?" "Yes. And when that well dried up, she came back to drain mine." He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, he sounded different. Not stronger, not yet, but clearer. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." "Good," I said, not with joy but relief. "It's the first step. I need to get tested. I need to check our accounts. I need to... His voice cracked. Dad, I don't even know who I am anymore. You're still my son, I said. And now you've got a chance to become the man you were always meant to be. We stayed on the line a while longer. He didn't say much, and neither did I. But sometimes, the silence between two people who finally understand each other says more than words ever could. When we finally hung up, I sat there in the dark, not with peace, but with purpose. We weren't done yet, not even close. But at least now, we were finally facing the right direction, together. 3 days after Jason filed for divorce, I was woken at 6:03 a.m. by a thunderous pounding on my front door. Not knocking pounding. The kind that shakes the hinges and makes your heart skip before your brain catches up. I slipped on a robe, looked through the peephole, and there she was, Sienna. Hair a mess, mascara smeared, wearing what looked like yesterday's designer blouse, wrinkled from sleep, or more likely the lack of it. "Victor!" she screamed, voice raw. "I know you're in there. Open this damn door." The porch camera was recording, thank God. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't give her anything. She kept going. "You destroyed my life," she shouted, voice cracking. "You turned Jason against me with your sick little lies." The porch lights across the street flicked on. I saw Mrs. Klein open her curtain, just as the Hendersons' dog started barking. Sienna kept pacing back and forth like a caged animal, her voice louder with each passing second. "You can't just get away with this. I gave everything to that man. And this is how you repay me? Ruining my marriage? Calling the cops on me?" I pressed the intercom button on my security panel. "Sienna," I said flatly. "Leave. Right now." She froze and looked up at the little camera blinking just above the doorframe. "You owe me that much, Victor. You owe me a conversation." "I owe you nothing," I said. "You assaulted me. You lied, manipulated, and stole. You are not welcome here. Leave, or I'm calling the police." "Call them!" she screamed. "Let them hear how you drove a woman to desperation. Let them know you're a bitter old man who can't stand to see his son happy." Then she began shouting our private family history into the morning air, loud enough for the entire street to hear. She listed off Jason's salary, claimed I had spies following her, accused me of sabotaging her dreams, and screamed about how she had given up everything for this family. That was the line that finally pushed me over the edge. I picked up the phone and dialed 911. "Yes, this is Victor Reynolds on Alder Street," I said, calm as stone. "The woman who assaulted me last week is on my property again, shouting threats and refusing to leave. Yes, I have security footage. Yes, I'd like officers dispatched." I hung up. The dispatcher's tone was sympathetic but efficient, like she'd dealt with one too many unhinged ex-daughters-in-law that week. Sienna, perhaps hearing me from the other side of the door, began pounding harder. "You think this is over? It's not over. I'll ruin you, Victor. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of controlling monster you really are." Then she began crying, loud, performative sobs that were so theatrical, I almost laughed. Almost. 5 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into the driveway. Same officers from last time. Officer Jenkins, the seasoned one, approached first, and I opened the door just wide enough to speak. "She's back," I said. "I have everything recorded. We'll take it from here, Mr. Reynolds." Outside, Sienna was now sobbing on her knees in my flower bed, smearing dirt across her blouse as she cried. "He won't even look at me. Jason left me. I have nowhere to go." "Ma'am," Jenkins said, "we've been through this. You've been told to stay away from this property. If you don't comply, we'll have to arrest you again for trespassing." "Where am I supposed to go?" she shrieked. "Jason kicked me out of the motel. My friends won't take my calls." "That is not Mr. Reynolds' responsibility," Jenkins said firmly. "You need to leave. Now." She wailed louder, like the sound itself would reverse the truth. But eventually, under pressure, and with the looming presence of 2 armed officers, she stood, brushed herself off, and muttered something hateful under her breath as she stomped toward the sidewalk. "I'll make you regret this," she hissed before disappearing down the block. Once they were gone, I stood there for a while in the morning sun, breathing deeply, wondering how much more chaos this woman could produce before she finally burned out. That afternoon, Jason called. He sounded stronger, like a man who'd finally come up for air. I heard she showed up at your place. She did, I said. Yelling, crying, threatening. Police took care of it. I told her to stay away. I told her we were done. I don't know what else to do. You did the right thing, I said. That's all you can do. She's saying she'll take me down with her, he added, voice quieter. That she has things from our past. Financial stuff. I paused. What kind of things? There was a long silence. Then he said, Dad, I need to tell you something. Things I should have told you a long time ago. And just like that, I realized we weren't at the end of this story. Not yet. We were only halfway through the fire. Jason's voice on the other end of the line had changed again. It no longer carried the panic of a man drowning or the shame of someone caught in a lie. It carried something more dangerous truth that had been buried too long, finally clawing its way to the surface. I leaned forward in my chair, gripping the armrests tighter than I realized. I'm listening, I said. He sighed, then hesitated, as if the words themselves had to fight their way out. When Sienna and I first got married, things were tight. She didn't want to downsize her lifestyle, and I didn't want to disappoint her, so I fudged some numbers on our mortgage application. Said I made more than I did, and I might have left out some debts. The muscles in my jaw clenched. I didn't interrupt. Then there was the car loan, he continued. She wanted the Lexus. I forged a pay stub to get approved. I exhaled slowly, watching the steam rise from the cup of tea in front of me. Jason, I said carefully, are you telling me you committed financial fraud? I guess. Yeah? I mean, I didn't think of it that way at the time. It felt like stretching the truth, just to get us what we needed to start our life. No, son, that's not stretching the truth. That's fraud. That's a crime. Do you understand that? I do now, he whispered. And she kept records of everything. Emails, fake documents, scanned files on a drive she controlled. She said it was for our records, but now I know it was leverage. I stood up and started pacing the kitchen floor, my pulse picking up speed. She's blackmailing you. Not directly, he said, but she's made it clear if I try to go after her in court or if I support your lawsuit, she'll go public with all of it. She said she'd ruin me. What did you tell her? That I didn't care, he said. That I'm done living in fear of her. That I'll face whatever comes, but I'm not staying married to someone who spent my life savings and then kept a file of threats in case I ever tried to leave. I stopped pacing. My son had finally woken up. I could hear it in his voice. This wasn't just regret, it was resolve. You need to tell Robert, I said. Immediately. We need to get ahead of this. I know, he said. But I'm scared, Dad. If this gets out, I could lose my job, my license, my reputation, everything. Then you face it, I said. You face it like a man, like the man I raised you to be. And you tell the truth before she gets a chance to twist it into something worse. Can you come with me? He asked quietly. To the meeting? That one question, so small, so childlike, hit me harder than anything he'd said so far. Of course, I said. You're not doing this alone. The next morning we sat across from Robert Ames in his office. Jason looked like he hadn't slept in days, but for once his eyes didn't dart around with panic. He looked straight ahead and told the truth, every ugly piece of it. Robert didn't flinch. He just took notes, asked clarifying questions, and when Jason finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, Well, it's serious, but it's not insurmountable. You think we can get ahead of it? I asked. We'll file a voluntary disclosure. It won't erase the crimes, but it'll demonstrate that Jason's taking responsibility. The IRS and the licensing boards are far more lenient when someone comes clean before an investigation begins. What about Sienna? Jason asked. If she releases anything, she'll be hurting her own case, Robert replied, especially now that we have motive. The blackmail attempt could become part of our countersuit if she retaliates. She said she knows things about me, Jason muttered. Stuff that would surprise even Dad. Then let her surprise us, I said. At least we're done hiding. As we walked out of the office, Jason stopped me in the hallway. Dad, he said, voice quieter now. Thank you for not turning your back on me. I looked him square in the eyes. You turned your back on yourself, Jason. I'm just here to help you turn around. He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, he looked like my son again. Not the man Sienna had sculpted from manipulation and fear, but the boy I used to lift onto my shoulders, the teenager who used to help me fix the gutters, the young man who cried at his mother's funeral and promised to always look after me. We still had a mountain to climb. Sienna wouldn't go down without a fight, but we were finally climbing together, and that made all the difference. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in feeling. The walls were dull beige, the lighting sterile, and the benches hard enough to punish anyone who dared to sit through a full day of proceedings. I sat beside Robert Ames, hands folded neatly in my lap, heart steady but heavy. Jason sat behind me, just a few feet away, close enough to remind me that I wasn't in this fight alone anymore. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." Judge Louise Harrell entered, a silver-haired woman with deep lines around her eyes, and the posture of someone who had seen enough lies to recognize them before the first word left your lips. Then, from the other side of the room, Sienna walked in, dressed like she was auditioning for a role. Dark blue suit, modest makeup, hair perfectly straightened, the very image of professionalism if you ignored the resentment dripping from every step she took. Her attorney, a younger woman named Brooke Fallon, looked competent, sharp, and entirely too confident for someone defending what I knew to be a financial hurricane in heels. As the proceedings began, Fallon stood up and painted a narrative I hardly recognized. According to her, Sienna was a devoted wife, thrust into financial chaos by a father-in-law who never approved of her. The promissory note? A misunderstanding between family members. The missed payments? Oversights, not intentional. The slap? A moment of emotional distress, exacerbated by verbal abuse. I sat motionless, as the courtroom was spoon-fed revisionist history. Robert didn't react either. He waited, like a chess master giving his opponent room to overextend, and she did every dramatic pause, every tearless mention of Sienna's suffering, every subtle dig at my character. She spoke like a woman who had rehearsed in front of a mirror, but never expected to be questioned. Then Robert stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace or gesticulate. He simply laid out the facts, one by one. He submitted the original promissory note with my and Jason's signatures, dated, notarized, legal. He presented a detailed payment history, or more precisely, the complete lack of one. He showed video footage of the incident on my porch, neighbors' witness statements confirming the slap, and security footage of her return visit, screaming threats at my front door. Then came the financial trail. $580,000 gone in less than 6 months. Jewelry receipts, spa trips, credit card payoff documents, boutique investment transfers with no associated business registrations, a lifestyle funded by the dismemberment of Jason's financial future. And finally, Robert called Jason to the stand. My son walked slowly, deliberately, to the witness chair. Under oath, he told the truth not just about the money or the assault, but about the years of manipulation, the subtle isolation from his family, the decisions he had made under pressure. He even admitted to the financial falsifications he and Sienna had committed early in their marriage. I braced myself for judgment, but it didn't come. Instead, Judge Harrell asked him a single question. "And have you voluntarily disclosed these infractions to the relevant authorities?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jason said. "I'm cooperating fully. I want to make it right." She gave a brief nod, as if marking a point on a mental scoreboard. The courtroom was still as Robert made his closing remarks. "This is not a story of a petty family squabble," he said. "It is the story of a woman who systematically used deception to access wealth, spending it recklessly, then playing the victim when held accountable. It is the story of a father who offered support, and a son who lost himself but chose to return, and it is a story of consequences, not cruelty, consequences." Fallon made a rebuttal, something about emotional trauma and family dynamics, but it sounded hollow in the wake of what had come before, and then it was time. Judge Harrell shuffled her papers, set down her glasses, and looked at each of us in turn. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Victor Reynolds," she said. "The defendant is ordered to repay the sum of $52,000, plus legal fees. Repayment shall be made within 60 days. Failure to do so will result in wage garnishment and potential asset seizure. Sienna gasped audibly. Fallon put a hand on her shoulder, but it was too late. The performance was unraveling. Furthermore, the judge added, this court is forwarding all financial records and testimony to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal fraud charges. That matter will be handled separately. For a second, Sienna didn't move. Then she turned to Jason and hissed loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "You spineless coward. You let him destroy us." Jason didn't respond. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at her. He just stood and walked back to the bench behind me, where he sat down in silence. When it was over, we stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. Jason looked at me, eyes tired but finally clear. "It's done," he said. "Not yet," I replied, "but we're finally free to begin." And for the first time in months, we both breathed deeply without choking on guilt or fear or lies. Only air, honest and clean. 3 months passed. In that time, the leaves turned. The lawsuit was filed, heard and settled, and Jason began showing up at my house every Sunday. Not for help, not for money, just to sit, to talk, to rebuild. He moved into a modest apartment near the edge of town, took a lower-paying job at a smaller firm, one that had full knowledge of his financial disclosures, but was willing to give him a second chance. He worked longer hours, ate humbler meals, and spoke with a quiet clarity I hadn't seen in years. The arrogance that once lived in his voice was gone. So was the edge of defensiveness. In its place was something far more valuable: accountability. He made his first payment to me that November, $500, handed over in a sealed envelope with a note that read, "First of many, thank you for not giving up on me." I didn't cry when I read it, but I kept the note tucked in my desk drawer, right under the photo of him and his mother the day he graduated college. Some things are worth holding on to. Meanwhile, Sienna disappeared from public view. Rumors swirled, mostly from Mrs. Klein, who swore she saw her leaving town in a silver sedan with out-of-state plates. The boutique investigation escalated. Turns out Sienna's friend had done this before: set up shell businesses, solicited investments, drained accounts, and vanished. But this time, with enough paperwork and sworn testimony, the authorities had enough to charge her and possibly Sienna with wire fraud and criminal conspiracy. I was sipping coffee one crisp December morning when Jason called. "You should turn on the news," he said. "Channel 4. I did." The headline read, "Fake boutique investor arrested in multi-state fraud scheme." A blurred mugshot confirmed what I already suspected. The woman Sienna had wired hundreds of thousands to wasn't a real business owner. She was a seasoned con artist. "Will it help us get anything back?" I asked, still watching the screen. "Probably not," Jason said. "The money's long gone, but it might help with the criminal case." I could hear him hesitate on the other end of the line. "And it might keep her from doing this to someone else." A few weeks later, we found out Sienna had been subpoenaed as part of the investigation. Her financial records were seized. She tried to countersue, claiming emotional trauma, coercion, even alleging that Jason and I had conspired to ruin her life for rejecting family expectations. But the judge didn't entertain it, not for a second. The evidence spoke louder than her accusations. One cold January night, long after the dust had started to settle, I was sitting on the back porch when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally I wouldn't have answered, but something told me to. "Victor Reynolds?" a female voice asked. "Yes. My name is Jennifer. I'm Sienna's sister." I didn't respond. My first instinct was to hang up, but her voice didn't sound like Sienna's. There was no sugar, no venom, just exhaustion. "I don't want anything from you," she said. I need your help." "Help with what?" "Stopping her," she said. "She's doing it again. Different name. New city. Same story. She's engaged to someone who doesn't know anything about what happened with you and Jason. She's spinning some sob story about an evil ex-husband and a controlling father-in-law." I tried to warn him, but he won't listen to me. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "Because you're the only one who fought back, the only one who made her face consequences." We talked for an hour. She told me stories I already knew by heart: how Sienna had manipulated their parents, cut off family members who questioned her, dated men for money, used lies like currency. Jennifer was a schoolteacher in Florida, trying to clean up the wreckage her sister left behind. "I just want to know how you did it," she said. "How you stopped her." I thought for a long moment. You don't stop someone like Sienna, I finally said. You outlast her. You document everything. You don't let shame or guilt talk you into silence. And you never ever let her make you feel small. She thanked me, and we said goodbye. I never heard from her again. But that conversation stayed with me, proof that the damage Sienna left behind stretched further than I'd imagined. That we weren't the first victims and likely wouldn't be the last. But at least now, someone else had a map. Jason made his 6th payment the following month. He brought it in person, handed me the envelope, and said, "Only $48,000 to go." I laughed not because it was funny, but because it felt good to laugh at all. Later that evening, as I was locking up for the night, I found something slipped through my mailbox. No return address, just a single white envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "I know where you live. This isn't over." No name, no signature. But the handwriting was familiar, curved, and elegant. All show, no substance. I stared at it for a moment, then fed it through the shredder. I didn't call the police. I didn't respond. I just turned on my porch light, checked the security camera feed, and went to bed. Because it was over. For me, for Jason. She could haunt herself now. We were done. A year later, I sold the house. Not because I had to, not because I was running from anything, but because the space no longer felt like home. It had become a museum of a war I never wanted to fight. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of raised voices, of slammed doors, of truths dragged into the daylight like ghosts clawing their way out of old closets. And I was tired of ghosts, so I sold it, packed up my life in a dozen boxes, and moved to a quiet retirement community in Arizona. Just me, my tools, my books, and the garden gloves I refused to part with. My new place is a modest condo, with a back patio that looks out over the mountains, where the sun sets in long golden ribbons, and the air always smells like dry earth and blooming sage. There's a book club here, and a garden club too, most of them women with silver hair and strong opinions, which suits me just fine. I spend my mornings tending to a small patch of roses and succulents, and my afternoons reading in the shade or helping the neighbor across the way fix her leaky faucet. Nobody here knows the whole story. They don't ask why I sometimes double-check the locks or why I always sit with my back to the wall at community dinners, and I don't offer. Some stories are too long to tell in a single conversation, and some wounds, though healed, leave behind scar tissue that makes you move a little slower when it rains. Jason visits twice a month. He flies in from Chicago, where he's found steady work at a firm that values second chances and has colleagues who see him for the man he's trying to be, not the one he used to be. He's still paying me back, methodically, without reminders. Last month he brought me a check and a pair of new hiking boots. "You've got trails now," he said, grinning. "No excuse not to use them." We sat on the porch that evening, drinking tea, as the sky turned lavender and orange, and he told me he'd been dating someone new. A woman named Grace. "She's not flashy," he said. "Not perfect. But she listens. She works hard. She doesn't care about brands or big houses. Just real things." I nodded, smiling. "Sounds like a good start." He looked at me then, more serious. "Dad, if I ever forget what matters again, promise you'll remind me." "No," I said. "That's your job now. I did my part." And he laughed, not the hollow laugh I'd grown used to in the early days of his unraveling, but a real one, solid, whole. Some nights, though, when the air is too still or the shadows stretch a little too far across the patio, I still think of her Sienna. Not out of longing, not even out of anger anymore, but in the way you think of a storm long past. You remember the damage, but also how it made you reinforce the foundation. Last I heard, she was facing federal charges tied to the boutique scam. A few of the other investors finally came forward after seeing our case in the public docket. Her attorney tried to argue mental instability, coercion, and even attempted to paint her as a victim of her upbringing. But the paper trail was undeniable. She disappeared again before the hearing. Some say she fled to Mexico. Others say she's in hiding, working under an alias somewhere in Texas. I no longer care. Let her run. Let her vanish into the mess she made. My door is locked. My camera is on. And more importantly, my life is mine again. Then one evening, just as I was finishing my tea, Margaret from next door called over the fence. "Victor," she said, "there's someone at your door. Young woman. Looks nervous. I stood slowly, heart tightening with instinct. When I reached the front door, I found her a woman in her 20s, brown hair pulled back, eyes tired but alert. She looked like someone who'd practiced this speech a dozen times but wasn't sure she'd get through it without breaking. "Mr. Reynolds?" she asked. "My name's Emily. I'm Sienna's niece." I said nothing, just opened the screen and stepped outside. "I know this is unexpected," she continued, "but I've been trying to trace her trail for months. She's been showing up in other people's lives, spinning the same lies she told your son. She's hurt a lot of people. I've been trying to warn them, but no one listens. They all think I'm bitter, or jealous, or crazy." Her voice cracked. "You're the only person who ever stopped her." We sat on the patio. I made us tea, and for 2 hours I told her everything, not just the facts, but the process. How to document, how to record, how to report, what to say, what not to say, when to speak, and when to stay absolutely silent and let the evidence do the talking. At the end of it, Emily wiped her eyes and said, "I don't know how you survived it." I smiled faintly. "You don't survive it. You rebuild. You get smaller, then stronger, then wiser. And one day you realize you're not surviving anymore, you're living again." She left just after sundown, armed with a folder of copies and a phone number for Robert Ames. And me? I stood on the porch for a while, watching the desert sky bloom into stars, and realized something I hadn't felt in years. I was at peace. Not because the fight was easy, but because I had finished it on my terms. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think twice about the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and become part of a growing community that values truth, resilience, and the courage to face hard things head-on. Every week we share powerful real-life stories, just like this one stories about family, betrayal, redemption, and the moments that shape us forever. By subscribing, you won't just be supporting our work, you'll be joining a space where people find connection, healing, and sometimes even the push they need to make a change in their own lives. And if you've ever faced a moment like Victor's, if you've ever had to make a painful choice for the right reasons, let us know in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And if this episode meant something to you, give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Thanks for being here. We'll see you in the next one.